Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Courageous Curiosity, where we ask questions that pique our interest and try and explore different topics that would be interesting to our community and in the district. I'm really excited about today. We have kind of a star-studded cast here. We have a group of board members, former board members, people that know a lot about school board things. And one of the things that has been a really curious question for a lot of people is, what exactly do school board members do? What are their responsibilities? How do they interact with the superintendent and support the district as a whole? We are in an interesting year. We have a school board election coming up in November, and so a lot of people might be asking the question, well, what's the time commitment like? What is it? What do they do? All of those types of things. And so we're really, really fortunate today because we have a former board member, we have a newer board member, we have a current board president, and we have somebody who actually consults and works with school boards all over the state of Michigan. So it's been awesome, and I appreciate all of you for being here today to share kind of your expertise. And so I'm going to ask that each of you give kind of your 30-second to 1-minute elevator speech and just let people that are watching the show know a little bit about your background and maybe how you enter this space. And so I'll start with you, Bobbie, as our former board member.
My name's Bobbie Murphy, and I'm a former Novi Board of Education trustee for 16 years. I retired, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, seems like just yesterday.
It does seem like yesterday. But I have 4 kids that went through the Novi Community School District and was a part of the Deerfield community at one point in time when they first started. So my kids were actually in a private school before we transferred them over. There was a lot of overcrowding at our elementary school, and the decision was tough, but we made a decision. But then when Deerfield opened, we moved over there. So got involved with the schools at that point in time and kind of took off running at one point in time. I was good friends with Carol Elfring, who was on the school board. Lovely lady that we've recently lost about 2 years ago. But she kind of prompted me at one point, said, you're pretty involved in all these things, and what would you think about running for the school board? I don't think I'm going to run again next year, and I would love to support you. So that was kind of the start of it, like planting the seed, and then, some other things confirmed that maybe that was the direction I should go. Not that I really wanted to win, but I did throw my hat in the ring. And I had 4 kids in 4 different schools at that point.
Wow.
So I was doing a lot of volunteering, chairing things, and it was spreading out. I was spread pretty thin, so I actually thought it would consolidate my time, so I'm currently a clinical therapist. I have a degree in social work, a master's in social work from the University of Michigan, and I work with all different age groups, trying to help them navigate life when it gets tricky and tough. And so I'm in a private practice, so I'm currently doing that in my time that got freed up from the school board, as well as some other continuing volunteer things.
And you were a school board member for quite a while.
16 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Brad.
I'm Brad Banasik. I'm legal counsel and director of labor relations for the Michigan Association of School Boards. In May, I'll be with MASB for 27 years.
Wow.
Started out in the area of education, graduated from Western Michigan with a degree in education, majoring in history and social sciences, and this was back in the 1990s when those teaching positions were a dime a dozen. So I decided to go to law school and wanted to remain in the education field, and was fortunate to get hired by MASB doing policy work for them, which was a great way to learn the foundations of school law, just writing policy for school districts. And after doing that for 2 years, the current legal counsel for MASB retired, and I was fortunate enough to get that position. So I've been legal counsel for about 25 years now, and love working with board members, working with superintendents, like getting out into different districts, doing workshops, teaching classes. So yeah, when you're in a job for 27 years, I guess you like it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm still there.
Well, it's awesome that you're here, and I've had the opportunity in my 8 years as a superintendent to work with you, and you're highly sought after, so I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to be on the show today. So, Mr. Cook.
Yeah, my name's Paul Cook. I I've been serving for I don't know how many years.
Oh, wow.
I'm currently the board president, and by trade, I'm an engineer. And my wife used to say I'd get bored and go get another degree. But when the kids came along, when I got bored, there were a couple openings that were interviewed for on the board. And being a nobody out of nowhere, I applied for them, was not chosen. But the people they chose at those times probably would have served better. And then, so I eventually ran. And since then, I've enjoyed my time on the board. I do have 2 kids in the district. We've gone through Parkview and Meadows and the middle school. They're both at the high school now. And, it was kind of my chance to serve the community that I've lived in for almost 30 years now.
That's awesome. It's awesome. It's great to have you here. Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Michener.
Good morning. My name's Jason Michener, and people usually like to know where you're from, what do you do, so I'll answer that in a kind of a continuous story. So I'm originally from the East Coast, grew up in a suburb outside of Philly, went to public schools there, was fortunate enough to graduate and matriculate into Princeton University. I did a dual major in aerospace and mechanical engineering, which brought me out to Michigan to work for a major OEM. I've been with them for over 20 years now. And during that time that I've been out here, I've lived in Novi for all of that entire time except for the first year. And I was fortunate enough to meet an amazing woman, Tara, my wife. We have a son who's 10, and he attends our schools here, and was fortunate enough to run for the board and get elected just last year. So I've served for about a year.
Yeah.
And it's been quite an experience. So
Yeah.
really, really love the work and love learning about the work.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I can sense the Philly accent just a little bit in your voice there.
It comes out when I say water.
Okay. Water.
Anybody from the East Coast will appreciate
That's
that.
right.
Drink
That's
water
right.
out there.
That's awesome. Well, let's start from a foundation, and I'll let any of you take this question. I think all 4 of you can answer it well, but a lot of times people wonder, we talk about superintendents have a lane and then board members have a lane. And, a lot of times in recent years, what I will say is that lane has gotten blurred. But we do want to try and understand a little bit about what are the core functions of what the board does. So, you think about how board members and superintendents work together. So from a foundational level, how would you all answer the question, what do you think the role of a board member really is?
I guess I can start. I'll go back to when I first started at MASB in writing policy. I think that is one of the primary functions of a school board is developing policy for the school district, and that sets the parameters for how the administration acts to further the mission of the school district, accomplish the long-term and short-term goals. And when I get questions from board members, I usually direct them back to policy. Well, what does your policy say on this? And usually that's answers the question.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Paul, you're the current board president. I mean, when you we're going to have a new crop of people coming in to the board potentially this next year, depending on, who is elected. How would you counsel them on what your view is of what the board's role is?
Building off of what Brad said there, the board develops policies. There are some major policy providers now, and a lot of these policies are canned. Go through them, make sure you understand them. Your school is going to have one of the 3 companies managing them. Understand your policies, and then basically from there is an oversight, making sure that the administration, through the superintendent, is following what you believe those policies intend. And it's not, nowadays it's not as much about creating policy. It's more about the oversight and making sure everybody's following what was intended.
Yeah. Bobbie, you've been around a bit. You've done this. You were the board president for a while as well. When you talk to new board members, kind of how did you capture what those primary functions were?
Well, obviously policy, and I know I went through at least 3 different policy revisions. I think three different providers too. And really, we tweaked some of them, like because they are canned, and your district, needs to adapt them so that they work for your community. Board members probably know the community collectively with 7 people, like different facets of it. Usually there's a very diverse group on the board, whether that's intergenerational people or people that have young kids versus older kids. So making sure that you're reading those policies kind of with every student in mind. When you have that diversity on your board, it helps as you're reading through policy to make sure that it is adaptable to your district. I know that I think we put in place at one point in time kind of a regular review of going through the policies so that there was some regular kind of updating of those besides just the legal updates that have to come through and be approved. But also hiring the superintendent. I've been through that a couple times.
Yeah, you have. You had to do that a few times.
Yes. That's a really big part of it too, that I think understanding like really what you want in a superintendent and going through that process is also something that boards hopefully won't have to take on for a while now, Ben.
Yeah, that's right.
But is certainly one of the roles that board members play, and then regularly communicating. I think with the superintendent being the eyes and ears of the community if there's things going on that are kind of raising some concerns or whatever. Sometimes you're going to hear about it from your neighbors before Ben's heard about it. So I think, being those eyes and ears and funneling that information Ben's way so that if there is kind of something that's bubbling up to the surface in your community, he can address that kind of up front rather than being reactive.
Sure.
I would say those are kind of some of the things that would be helpful.
Yeah. Jason, you're newer to the school board. I wouldn't call you new anymore. I think you've blazed through all of the MASB courses and, you've really been absorbing it in your first year. So talk a little bit about your experience, as somebody who's new. Is it exactly what you thought?
In one word, no. And I would just echo Bobbie and Paul. I do hope that I'll never have to exercise one of the most important board duties is to elect another superintendent. So
I appreciate that.
And then policy definitely is another big one. It's from everything that I've learned in my first year. It's the way we communicate to you and the rest of your administrative team what our priorities are and what's important, how we reflect the district's mission and values. Although it is interesting in the sense that, to Paul's point, that a lot of the stuff is prepackaged. So trying to figure out how to make Novi policy out of the standard policy decks that were provided is sometimes interesting. Not what I expected, but that definitely is a part of it. And I would just say that the biggest thing I've learned, and sum it up in 3 words, is our job is to close the loop. Take the policy, see everything that's supposed to, all the stuff that's supposed to matriculate out of that, and then close it back around and see, did the policy accomplish the objectives that we had in mind when we set it forth? And I feel like that's where all the work is. We review policy maybe once a year or so, and then piecemeal as it comes up, but a lot of the work is like closing the loop part of the process.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I want to piggyback on that. And I'm going to ask you a question, Brad, because 3 of our board members have said, a lot of the policies now are canned, right? And I certainly have a perspective on that, but it'd be interesting to hear from you when, I'm sure back when you started writing policies, a lot of times the boards were just like, hey, we're coming up with our own stuff. Why has it kind of moved to these major policy providers, and what type of shift have you seen in your time with that?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of it is about time. There are quite a bit of demands on a board member's time, and really difficult to schedule committee meetings or workshops where board members are actually sitting down and writing policy. When I started in that area, it was, okay, we're going to take your existing policy and I'm going to do notes on it, just updating it. And then if you agree with my notes, that will be your updated policy. So that was back in the late 1990s, and everything is kind of automated now where board members receive packets. I know with Neola, there are multiple options you can choose from. I haven't seen the editions of the Troon policies, whether those options are similar. But yeah, that's where the board comes into play on kind of making their policies specific to the school district, and choosing those options, whether that's done at a committee level and then making recommendations to the board, or certainly the full board can consider those updates as well.
Yeah, and we have Troon policies, which we did do quite an extensive implementation. You all had to read quite a bit of information. I think that was coming on right at the time you were heading out, Bobbie. But there are options and there are opportunities to make it your own. But when you choose to do that, right, you're stepping into a space where we probably need to get it reviewed by attorneys and making sure that we're not violating unintentionally other laws and things like that. So the policies have just become a beast. And I think a large part of that, from my lens, is there's so much legislation that is being pushed into the space of education that really drives a lot of requirements. And so our policies have become much more robust than they used to be. And we're just dealing with different issues than we used to deal with, of course. I would also say, you mentioned the role of like evaluating the superintendent, and certainly policy we've talked a lot about. I think one of the other big things is kind of the oversight of the finances. And I look at lanes, and I'll just kind of make a comment here. There are a lot of places, unfortunately, people who are in my position who are moving on, or they're doing something different because the board has kind of stepped into a space where they're trying to assume the roles that the superintendent takes. But the reverse is also true, where in some places the superintendents are trying to push into kind of the lanes of the board, right? So we've seen that with potentially a superintendent that's trying to implement policies that have not been necessarily approved or vetted by the board. But another one that I see probably more commonly is a superintendent that might be spending money or approving expenditures that are outside of that approved budget, right? So in terms of the roles of the board, another big one is the financial piece of that. And, there's just a lot. So I'm interested in maybe any one of the three of you that are, kind of served or are serving in our school board. It's like information overload with the thousands of accounts that we have and things like that. So how do you manage that responsibility of kind of financial oversight as a board member?
Well, currently, I know of a district that the board blindly followed superintendent, and they ended up in financial trouble because of it. But there also has to be, the board needs to take a look at the budget, make sure that the overall categoricals are within what they need, but there has to be a level of trust that the district and the administration is going to follow through on that and not overstep their bounds. It's another one of those oversight to make sure that things are where they need to be, but there's like you said, thousands of line items that you go through, and we'll get check card that'll show that every single teacher in the district had something that they needed. And, the minutia of that can be overwhelming.
Sure.
But if you take a look at it and say, hey, we're staying within these rails, and the administration is, then, there has to be a level of trust between the board and the administration that they're both going to work together to keep things under control.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is obviously there's a finance committee. I'm assuming that you still have that, which is really helpful for the committee to be the one that kind of does the fine combing of that, because obviously there's other committees that other people sit on that they could comb through that with a fine-tooth comb and come back and report. And I'm guessing that there's a regular report to the board too of budget updates or changes or shifts or things like that, which actually with some of our superintendents we didn't get always. Superintendents have different styles and different processes that they use.
Sure.
But having that regular process in place to be reviewing that, whether that's quarterly, this is a quarterly update, and then sometimes there's amendments that come through too that need to be addressed. But having a finance committee that maybe has somebody that's got a financial background that's looking through that too is really, I think, really helpful. We've been fortunate on the board to have somebody that's got a little bit of that in their background to be able to weed through all of that and then kind of come back to the board with either recommendations, and then we obviously do the audit and making sure those audit recommendations are also implemented because one of those was the card. Remember when they had like super users or whatever?
Yeah.
So they fine-toothed that because that was a recommendation from the audit people to make some adjustments to that. So
Sure.
just making sure that those things then are followed through on, like closing the loop, like Jason said, which
Yeah.
I think kind of goes back to that committee work, right? It's like when you're doing the committee work, you're looking at how are our policies actually affecting, the different places, and how are those working well, whether that's the finance committee or a curriculum or anything else.
Sure.
So I think that's that closing the loop piece to be able to kind of say, okay, is our policy doing what it's intended, because we're getting reports from a teacher or whatever about certain pieces of it.
Sure.
That's helpful feedback.
Yeah, no doubt.
I would just say I've come to see it kind of falls into 3 categories, at least for me, is the minutia, like the line item, each individual purchase on every district card. And for that, I'm just like, eventually I'll get a feel for what's normal and what's not, and just ask questions as they come up, as I start to learn. And then there's the numbers associated with all the capital projects that we have. And that is kind of making sure that everything looks reasonable and that we're staying within the budget for each planned expenditure, understanding where the funds are coming from. And then at the highest level, probably a lot of the stuff that the finance committee gets involved in, that I got the opportunity to sit on for last year, is overall big picture budget, the huge categories that the district has for general fund, transportation, and so on, and just making sure that we're within our revenue and we're not overspending and we have a healthy margin, and then just seeing like what opportunities are there to reduce expenditures and to bring more revenue in, and to have that discussion with you and your administrative team. And I think that's been really enjoyable to see that there are options and there are tools at our disposal. We just have to plan ahead and think wisely about it. And we can really continue to improve upon our great district.
Yep. I think all 3 of you said, you're hitting the nail on the head. But one of the things that I heard as kind of a through line there was the communication between the superintendent's office and all of the board. And so, Brad, you've worked with boards all over the state of Michigan. I know you talk a lot about communication, but I have experienced, in terms of whether it's supporting other superintendent colleagues through challenging situations, is that a lot of times the failure is in communication one way or another. Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
Yeah, it is. And when I talk to superintendents, I advise them, you want your board to hear important issues from you. You don't want them hearing it from a third party. There are a number of ways to accomplish good communications. What some boards have done is adopt operating procedures that create like a communication ladder and different thresholds for important communications and those that aren't so important, and how the superintendent can go about communicating the important issues, and what the timelines are for that. So you don't have board members coming back to you and said, well, how come I had to hear this from someone in the grocery store or something like that. And I think adopting procedures to accomplish that has been effective for a lot of board and superintendents, and establishing that good communication relationship.
Yep, for sure. So one of the things, and I know we're kind of starting to wind down a little bit, but the school boards, I think, quite frankly, in the United States of America, have become kind of the epicenter for American politics these days, right? We're dealing with very extreme sides, and we're seeing this play out nationally. We're seeing it play out, in a lot of local elections. One of the things that I think is leading to the high turnover rate in superintendents is that, you will oftentimes see somebody say, well, I'm going to run for the board because I'm going to do X, right? Or I'm going to do this one thing. And then I think maybe they were under the misguided perception of what school boards do, or what they, what their function is. And also they have to work with 6 other individuals. And quite frankly, it's really 7 other individuals, because they have to work with the superintendent in a lot of ways to enact some of those things. So is that a trend that you think, and any of you can answer this question, that you think we're going to continue to see? Or do you think we're doing a better job doing things like this very podcast to try and help people understand that the critical relationship between the superintendent and the board, and what the board members' focus areas are and things like that, Do you see that that's kind of starting to wane, or do you think we're just in for more of the same? And maybe what would be some of your advice on how to curb that storm a little bit?
Wow. Like, that's a deep question.
It's a deep question, but it's an important one,
Well,
right?
it is an important
Yeah.
one. I think part of the, the bigger, we're just a microcosm of this bigger divide that exists in our nation.
Sure.
Do I think that will continue? I mean, probably.
Probably, yeah.
So I think part of that is incumbent on communities to just make sure that they're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Part. Is there something that we as individuals can do about that? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that as you're looking to vote on school board members, having somebody that's willing to work with everyone that seems to have that as their primary goal to keep students first and like what those kinds of things, as opposed to somebody that's coming in saying, I'm really unhappy with X that the school is doing and
Yeah.
I need to get on the board so I can make those changes.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself is probably a little problematic, but it really
Yeah.
depends on how voters are going to respond.
Sure. I mean, literally in one of my colleagues' districts, a school board member ran because their daughter didn't make the 7th grade volleyball team, and they were upset about that decision, and so that was what preempted them to run for the school board, right? And so I think some of those things, then they're on a board, and for us, it's a 6-year commitment. And is that really the work that you wanted to do? Because it's very complicated, it's complex, right? And so I think a lot of it's about motive. But
I think that divide has always been there. When I first ran, people came up and said, "Hey, they fired this coach. I didn't like that.
Yeah.
You need to do something about that." It's like, I don't know anything about the situation, but you once you're in, you have to realize, like Bobbie said, is you're doing this for every child, not just that parent's child or your child.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it for every child, and to make sure that all the subgroups are well represented and well taken care of. Because here in Novi, it's easy to say, hey, we're high performing. We've got kids off the charts. But we also have subgroups in there that aren't performing as well. We have special education kids who need other things. We have kids who can perform very high, but because of the way they learn, are not achieving where they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so where's the politics in that?
Mm-hmm.
You need to keep the politics and, they're not doing this because of that. You need to keep all these other students and other members, because we're birth through 26
Right.
on a lot of people here.
Sure.
So it's to me, it's if you want to bring politics into it, you don't belong here.
Yeah.
And you need to learn to agree to disagree on a lot of things.
Mhm.
But, keep in mind that it's all students that we're representing.
Yep. Yep.
So I think what I've learned is it needs your drive to be on the school board needs to come from a deep passion to want to do the best for the kids in our district.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's just a one issue thing, whether that issue gets accomplished or not, there's 6 years of work to be done. and I found it is a lot of work, especially to do it really well, and to, at least for me, to do it to the level that I feel like I need to be performing to do the job that I was elected to do. There are some days, and I think I've even shared this with you, Ben, where I'm like, I forgot what my actual job was. I can't remember if I'm working for the school district
Right.
or if I'm working, in the private sector this week, because it's been so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine being able to sustain that kind of intensity and energy and investment in becoming a better school board member if I was a single issue board member. There's a lot to be done. And even in an amazing district like this, there's still so many things that we can do better, that there's left to be learned, that we could discover or try out. But all of that takes an intense amount of research, knowledge, interacting, and communication. And I feel like that kind of drive has to come. Has to come from a real passion to, do your very best for each and every child that's in this district every time, you're putting on your board hat.
Mm-hmm. Love what you all said, and I know we're kind of running short on time, but I would love for you to give kind of a pitch, each one of you, if you would. What would be your sage 30-second advice for anyone that would be considering maybe looking to be on a school board, or for people that are maybe not interested in running for the school board, but they're interested a little bit more on what school board members do? What would be kind of your closing kind of advice or wisdom or takeaways that you'd like to leave the audience with? We'll start with you, Jason, this time to give Bobbie a break, and we'll go this way.
I would say whether you're interested for running or interested in what the board does, what I did, and I think probably one of the best ways to do it is to come to the board meetings or at least watch them online. You'll get a really good feel for about 50% of what the board does, maybe 40. There's a lot more work behind that I've found out, but you at least get an idea of what they're talking about, what issues come before them, what power and authority they have and what they don't. And you'll get a flavor for, what the board as a whole, as a team, is responsible for in the community. And then, either that satisfies your curiosity or it just whets your appetite. And in that case, maybe running for a board is something you want to do. But I feel like that's a good jumping in point. And I feel like if it's hard for you to watch all the board meetings, then that probably is an indication that you wouldn't want to actually be a board member, because that's the minimum amount of commitment required for
sure.
the position.
Yep.
It's not rocket science. And I've heard a lot of people go, "Oh, you're on the school board. You must be really smart." You need to be dedicated to the kids. You need to be, thinking about some of those underserved groups. And you also need to, it's not one kid or two kid or four kids or how many kids you have. It's in our district, it's over 6,000 kids. And, don't be scared by some former board member saying, well, I attended 300 events a year. You don't have to do that, and you're only one of 7. That's the other thing is, it's not you making the decisions, not you giving the directions. Your voice is one of 7, and it's the 7 of you who speak as one to the district and set that. So
Awesome.
It's not rocket science.
A
A lot of reading, but not rocket science.
It's a lot of reading.
Yeah, kind of echoing what Paul indicated. If you're going to be a committed, engaged team player, I think serving on the board is not for someone who wants to be the lone wolf, so to speak, to come in and rile things up and to have their own individual agenda. Because if you're someone like that, I don't believe you're going to last long. The board acts as an entity. As Paul indicated, not one individual board member has the authority to make a decision. You have to have at least 4 votes in order to go a direction with a 7-member board. And if you're not willing to be a team player, if you're not willing to be one of 7, I don't believe serving on the board is the right position for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I would say first, like having a passion for kids is really important because they're the center of everything a board does.
Yeah.
All kids, like Paul said, just back to that. And also being a collaborative, somebody that wants to be collaborative with other people, not somebody that, like Brad said, is going to be a lone ranger and come in and, want to call attention to themselves. I think it's also helpful for board members to be able to be a little self-reflective. I made mistakes when I was first on the board, stepped into other people's lanes, being able to be somebody that the superintendent could say, hey, you're out of your lane, without becoming offended or, upset and things like that, and being able to say, oh, yeah, you're kind of right. So some of those things from a personal standpoint, I think were really helpful for me was just to be able to hear that. And also, you have to have thick skin. I developed that on the board, don't you think, Paul? You kind of have to
Very
have thick skin because you cannot please everyone. It's just not possible. So if that's your bent, that you really want to please everyone all the time, and everybody needs to like you, you're going to learn pretty quickly that that's just not possible as a school board member. You just have to know that you've done the work, that you go in there every time with the kids at heart, and that you're making your decisions based on the your best, the best information that you have, and I think at the end of the day, then that makes it easy to sleep at night, knowing that you've done that. So I think those are some of the things, like if you have really thin skin and you're going to be hurt by people not being happy with you, that's tough. I mean, you're not going to be able to tolerate that as a board member, because you can't please everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been so great, and I really appreciate all of your insights and your expertise. The collective wisdom that you all have and you're bringing to this is excellent. And I hope that anybody that's interested, whether you're in our district or not in our district, a little bit more about how a board operates and what they do. You had some great insights here today, and I hope that you'll be able to pick something out from that. If you're interested, stay tuned for our next episode. It'll release in a couple weeks. We're going to be talking about a lot of the things that students are getting involved with in risky behaviors. It'll be a little bit risky of a podcast, but we also have to find out what their needs are. And that's one of the things we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks with some of our student surveys. And so in our next podcast, we're going to talk about some of the, maybe concerning trends and behaviors that kids are getting involved in and what we can do about it as a community. I appreciate all of your support as always. And as always, stay curious and go Wildcats.